everybody. I want to welcome everybody to our second session of celebration of Ramakrishna Jayanti. Today, we had a wonderful celebration earlier this morning. We had His Excellency Indian Ambassador to Ireland, Akhilesh Mishra. We had Adrian Christie, who is Secretary of All Faith Ireland, and we had Poonam Rani, who was the counselor of this place. This program was nearly attended by 65 people, which is a big number of people after the COVID, I think so. And everything was done in impeccable way and beautifully. Today we have our guest lecturer, Reverend Swami Baneshananda ji. Now I would like to speak few words about him. Maharajji, the Vedanta Center, he is the head of Vedanta Center in Germany, and he has been living a practical life in Vedantic tradition for more than 45 years. He has been taught by a living and flourishing tradition of Vedanta under grinding disciplines in Ramakrishna Order of India. The Ramakrishna Order is the most eminent spiritual and charitable organization in the country. This order is known for its appreciation of what is good in other religion too. From November 2019 to September 21, Reverend Swami Baneshananda ji was the interim president of Vedic-centric Ramakrishna Mission, Getz, France. He also served the order in different capacities as its international headquarters in Belur Math near Kolkata, as head of law department at its branch center in Kakurgachi, which is also in Kolkata. As a personal assistant to Reverend Swami Bhuteshananda ji Maharaj, who was the vice president of Ramakrishna Order. As the chief accountant and chief warden of the student home of Shillong and Chennai Math, as the editor of English Monthly. He is conversant in few languages like Sanskrit, English, Bengali, and Assamese and Oriya, and one of the tribal language that is Khasi, and he is learning German too. From January 2001 to March 2004, he was the editor of one of two monthlies of Ramakrishna Order. The Vedanta Kesari, published from its center in Chennai. He had the rare opportunity to serve Swami Bhuteshananda ji Maharaj, who was the 12th president of Ramakrishna Order, who was a fine scholar of Vedanta and other philosophies. Reverend Swami Baneshananda ji learned some scripture under him. Swami Baneshananda ji has translated with his copious explanatory comments the famous Vedic treatise from original Sanskrit into Bengali. He holds regular online classes on the scriptures and on invitation speaks in different institutions, groups, and universities in Europe, US, Canada, and many other countries. Many of his lectures are available in the YouTubes under his name. He also regularly contributes articles to different journals and magazines in English, German, and Bengali. Swamiji also teaches the authentic theories and steps of meditation and conducts classes on guided meditation to demonstrate the applied aspect of Indian Yoga Vedanta meditation. I think so. There would be lot more to tell about Swamiji, but today I would like to end over here and request Swamiji to start his talk about Ramakrishna Jayanti. Swamiji.
Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. May God protect us. May He nourish us with knowledge. Let us have the intellectual capability to grasp the meaning of what we study. May what is studied by us be brilliantly clear. Let us not have any misunderstanding about our studies. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let there be freedom from three possible obstacles. Dear friends and devotees, I am thankful to Swami Shanti Vratanand and our dear Purnanand inviting me to speak to you this evening. I deem it a great privilege. I am also thankful to Swami Shanti Vratanandaji for collecting this introduction, a generous introduction about me. I hope I will be equal to those qualities. Anyway, let me first acknowledge and clarify that the topic is a really big one, Sri Ramakrishna and His Gospel. I will try to highlight just a few points in this small time or in this talk today. As you all know, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna has been recorded by Mahendranath Gupta. He wanted to hide his own identity while he was taking part in the events mentioned in the Gospel. Therefore, he referred to himself as M. It is written with the English letter M capital, which is the initial for his name, Mahendranath. Sometimes he used pseudonyms like Master, because he was a teacher in a school. Sometimes Mani, sometimes a devotee, and so on. In the beginning of the Gospel, we see there is a kind of a job interview between Sri Ramakrishna and Mahendranath Gupta. It is hard to say who was the interviewer and who was the candidate. Initially, both of them played both roles. Like Sri Ramakrishna chose the disciple in Mahendranath, and M chose the guru in Sri Ramakrishna. Later on, we discovered that it was Sri Ramakrishna who engaged M to the job of noting down his words. Hence, this interview was needed, very important. I shall merely consider this second visit of M to Sri Ramakrishna that you get in the Gospel. I am not reading out the day's conversation here for lack of time, naturally. In this second meeting, we find a few very useful points for understanding Sri Ramakrishna's personality. And that is why I should say there is the need for reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Let me go through some points one by one. At first, a few doubts or questions were raised by M. I would try to deal with two good questions. Like the first question was, what is correct, God with form or God without form? We know that this is one of the most baffling questions thoughtful people all over the world are asking. the main logical question is, how would two supposedly contradictory things or experiences be true at the same time? We have some data to analyze in order to get to the solution and the truth. Number one, let us take a commonplace example. Scientifically speaking, we know that the sun does not move. At the same time, we see, while we know that the sun does not move, that is the scientific truth. At the same time, we see that the sun is rising in the east and setting in the west. If seeing is believing, then what we see, that is the sun is moving from east to west, should be true. But that is not true. That is the contradiction. We also know from physics that the dual wave-like and particle-like nature of light, and it is known as the wave-particle duality. This is a scientific truth. How do we accept this duality? Then we try to validate this contradiction. So where will we go? We have to go even beyond the scope of history. This contradiction has been validated as a whole by the Upanishad. It says that is in the verse number 4 and 5, just one short point, just the Upanishad mentions here, tad ejati tannai jati. Tat ejati, tat na ejati. Tat ejati means that moves. Tat na ejati, that does not move. So the idea here in the Upanishad is that the Atman, the reality, the self, moves. And at the same time, it does not move. It is far away, tadure, and it is the nearest, tadu antike. Tadu antarasya sarvasya, it is inside everyone, tadu sarvasyasya vajyataha, it is also outside. These are contradictory statements, and I am quoting the Upanishads. And that is the earliest source where we get this type of contradiction. And this has been resolved there. And the same type of contradiction we find in today's world, as I have said, giving two commonplace examples. And how do we solve that contradiction? I would like to turn to Shankaracharya for an ancient solution that is strongly, of course, validated by Sri Ramakrishna in our time, in the passages of this passage of the Gospel. I have quoted from the Upanishad. Shankaracharya resolves the issue commenting on this verse, saying that both statements, even though they are appearing as contradictory, they are valid and true. But they are valid and true under two different conditions. Under two different conditions. If someone says, suppose, a very simple example, I would like to eat. And the same person says, I don't like to eat. So, can you put a question? Why this contradiction? This contradiction seems to be a contradiction to us, because the person who is speaking, when he is hungry or she is hungry, she says, I will eat. That is the condition. Hunger is the condition. And if that person is not hungry, the same person will say, I will not eat. So There is no contradiction. So Shankaracharya says there is no inconsistency, for this is possible from the standpoint of two states. One state is conditioned state, another is unconditioned state. One statement is true when there is an observer for an object. Another statement is true when the observer knows himself or herself. There are no two. When there are two things, one knows another, then there is one condition. And when there is only one, that I know myself, there the condition changes. There is another condition. So both are true. One time it is dual, another time it is non-dual. So the second question is, who is eligible to follow Sri Ramakrishna's teachings? That will be understood from this wonderful second visit of M to Sri Ramakrishna. The doctrines of spirituality or the teachings preached by Sri Ramakrishna, they are at the same time humanistic. Number two, non-exclusive, means all-inclusive. Number three, they are proved to be authentic by the yardsticks of universal laws, by logic. And number four, they are practically applicable for one's own good as well as for the betterment of the whole world. So let us consider the first thing, that Sri Ramakrishna's gospel or teachings are humanistic. Spiritual life is not a fantasy, not an imagination. It is the only down-to-earth livable life. That is what is called spiritual life. Otherwise, this life is just fantasy. Without spirituality, life is meaningless. And without life, spirituality is useless. Swami Vivekananda has said, I do not believe in a God who cannot give me bread here and giving me eternal bliss in heaven, somewhere else. Again, he said, I do not believe in a God or religion which cannot wipe the widow's tears or bring a piece of bread to the orphan's mouth. That is why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the religion is not for an empty stomach. It is connected with our practical life. Number two, his teachings are non-exclusive. Sri Ramakrishna himself, as a little child, did not like to learn arithmetic for the simple reason that it teaches subtraction, meaning exclusion or deduction. How non-exclusive it is. So let us look at Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna strongly preached the idea of one God. This idea of one God is not something very new to a Hindu mind. We get references from the Vedas that the truth or ultimate reality, or call it God, is one. Still, we may ask a question, who defines this one God? Because everyone goes to define his or her God. Who defines this one God? That would be the quarrel or question, doubt. And the question seems to be irrelevant. Because if God is one, then we don't need to inquire who defines God. There should be no label on God. If the creation is one, then the creator should be one. The same creator common to every religion, every created being, and every created thing. Otherwise, if we accept that one God created one portion of this earth, another God, another portion of this earth, that is a false imagination. If there are many creations and therefore many gods as creators, then such gods should have their own creators. You'll ask who created that God. And these gods then will become creatures, created beings. Then will never remain creators. They will become creatures. This is one of Sri Ramakrishna's great contributions, that he defines God as one. Of course, the ways to reach this God may be and should be many and different. There is no problem about that. That is why Sri Ramakrishna next said that there are many paths. We have seen in the Gita, a great effort has been made to validate different kinds of yoga and spiritual approaches as true. In this regard as well, Sri Ramakrishna excels by the great degree of appreciation and acceptance of various spiritual paths he showed during his life. Sri Ramakrishna actually preached the idea of Jatomat Tatopat, as many faiths, so many paths. He practiced and then he said that. He practiced all of them. We say that Sri Ramakrishna has taught us religious pluralism. His major contribution in this respect was that religious pluralism, which teaches unconditional acceptance of all and never tolerance. So religious pluralism of Sri Ramakrishna is based on not tolerance, but acceptance. Swami Vivekananda was the first to proclaim this truth unto the world. It was only much later that the interfaith movements began, much later than Swami Vivekananda's statements. And many did not know or acknowledge the contribution of Swami Vivekananda in this respect. Nowadays, interfaith often centers on the idea of tolerance for other faiths. This is not, in fact, the religious pluralism taught by Sri Ramakrishna and what unbiased minds look for. Swami Vivekananda discouraged the use of the word tolerance because of its negative connotation, judgmental connotation. When we say that we tolerate others, it is as if their presence or beliefs are an imposition upon us. This is an arrogant position, because it may well be that we are, in fact, the very ones who are being somehow tolerated by others. There is a thin line between tolerance and intolerance, very thin line. Swami Vivekananda therefore taught that pluralism should stand on the basis of acceptance, not tolerance. What really occurs under the banner of interfaith is not actually pluralism also, but religious relativism. Let me explain this. This idea can be compared to the theory of relativity in science, which does not say that everything is relative. Rather, it says that everything is relative, but the speed of light is the one absolute. Similarly, the current approach to religious pluralism by some religions means that their own beliefs are absolute because they consider themselves as the chosen people who have the whole truth, and therefore regard other religions as isms or opinions, which they have to somehow tolerate. If we are truly pluralists rather than relativists, then the great universal ideas which we speak about in interfaith forums would also have been preached unto our own congregations. If this was done, then religious tensions would not exist. We may preach in interfaith forums, firing off big words we collect from a dictionary or thesaurus. But when we go back to our own religious places, we are unable to speak those words of acceptance to our own congregation. Nor are we able to practice those ideas in our own lives. Now we will see another thing here in this passage that comes out, that you see that Sri Ramakrishna or Swami Vivekananda, they were not technical philosophers, as we know a philosopher like Shankaracharya and others. Swami Vivekananda or Sri Ramakrishna were not really philosophers. None of the Vedic seers was technically a philosopher. This is true of Sri Krishna, Sri Rama, and a host of other great teachers as well. On the other hand, Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, and such others were, in fact, philosophers. They are technical philosophers. The Shrutis or Vedas need not abide by the rules of philosophy. It is rather incumbent on philosophies that they authenticate their conclusions, citing references from the scriptures, the Shrutis, the Gospels. This is called Shruti Anumodita Yukti. In logic, they say the Yukti, the logic which follows or which are approved by these scriptures. So we don't need to say that Sri Ramakrishna was a technical philosopher. They did not need to be. Then another fact here, you will see that Sri Ramakrishna is meeting M. Mahendranath Gupta, who was a professor of logic and philosophy. But he is meeting Sri Ramakrishna, who remained unlettered. This fact has unparalleled significance in the spiritual history of the world. Swami Vivekananda gave 4 reasons why Sri Ramakrishna's refusing to accept modern education was significant. So Swami Vivekananda writes, number 1, the experiences of Sri Ramakrishna are the same as those recorded in the scriptures. So what is written in the scriptures is true. Sri Ramakrishna's experiences validated the truth of the scriptures, revalidated. As a corollary, we can surmise that in this way, Sri Ramakrishna's own experiences stand confirmed or corroborated as true. Hence, he is a knower of the universal truth or Brahman or the reality. Number 2, Swami Vivekananda says, he demonstrated that the spiritual states recorded in the Vedas and in Vedanta are also true. That's what we have said now. Then number 3, he said, Swami Vivekananda said, Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated that the spiritual states recorded, the states recorded in the scriptures of other faiths are true. This is how harmony of religions can have a strong footing. It is by acceptance and not tolerance that we achieve this unitary goal. Then, number 4, Swami Vivekananda says, Sri Ramakrishna proved that all human beings can indeed achieve those states by treading the path of any religion. The importance of this assessment can hardly be understated. Truth is truth. It is nobody's personal property. Therefore, it is not a single person's privilege to realize it, and it can never be exhausted by one individual's realization. Then here we find a blissful Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna is talking to his devotees throughout the gospel, you will see. He is never sad in spite of his own physical ailments, sufferings. Actually speaking, if you read the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, one great thing you will understand that your sufferings are much, much less. Your sufferings will become smaller. Sri Ramakrishna was a serious person, even though sometimes it would seem that if he was always playful, because he would be making fun, talking, dancing, singing, etc. He would be in joy or bliss, even in the midst of terrible pains in his own physical body, you know that. But we are mere mortals. So we cannot fathom the spiritual behavior of a man of God. These are the ways in which the joy of one's realization is shared with others. Buddha, you know, Gautama Buddha, after his realization in Bodh Gaya, he went round and round the Bodhi tree 3 days and 3 nights. Such is the joy of realization, of experiencing bliss. He could not contain that joy. He went round and round. He did not know what to do. He behaved like a madman. That is the expression of joy. So we find a blissful Sri Ramakrishna in this. While continuously experiencing spiritual joy inside, one cannot cut a poker face of false seriousness outside. Not possible. Even today, most of us think that a spiritual person should be, or at least should look serious always, should look somewhat peculiar, not normal, should speak messages of the scriptures and great ones without mentioning the sources, should on the contrary claim or pretend to claim that those are his or her own sermons. And over and above that, should be young, handsome, with flowing beard, etc. These are called spirituality. Swami Vivekananda calls such a dichotomy in one's behavior a disease. Then we find another thing here. In the gospel, if you read the gospel, you will see that no fact has been compromised. Sri Ramakrishna would never compromise with facts and the truth. Here comes out the real seriousness. When M started to note down Sri Ramakrishna's words, Sri Ramakrishna did not forbid him. But he would sometimes check with M if M had written things correctly. Let me give an example. One day, Sri Ramakrishna asked him, "How do you like today's conversation?" Repeat it to me. M recapitulated from memory the whole conversation, what happened, and Sri Ramakrishna corrected him at places. Like, for example, Sri Ramakrishna is asking, "What did I say?" M. God takes upon himself complete responsibility for one who totally depends upon him. It is like a guardian taking charge of a minor. You also told us that at a feast, a child cannot by himself find a place to eat his meal. Someone finds a place for him. Then Sri Ramakrishna intervened and said, "No, that is not quite the point. I said that the child does not fall if the father leads him and holds his hand. Then M, and that day you spoke very rightly to Ishan about flatterers. They are like vultures on a carcass. You once said that to Padmalochan also. Sri Ramakrishna immediately intervened and said, no, not to Padmalochan, but to Vaman Das of Ulo. Small correction, but of great intellectual property right value. Intellectual property right. And then Sri Ramakrishna encouraged questioning. You will see in the Gospel, we read there that Sri Ramakrishna once during a conversation with devotees, one gentleman went on arguing with Sri Ramakrishna. Many in the audience felt uneasy. One of them told the particular gentleman, why do you argue? Accept it when he says so, when Sri Ramakrishna says so. This displeased Sri Ramakrishna like anything. He reacted saying, why do you ask him to accept? One should be encouraged to critically investigate into a thing, he said. Meaning is, you don't have to believe what I say simply because of the fact that I have a doctorate in theology. But you have to believe in anything after satisfying your own queries about it. That is what Sri Ramakrishna encourages in us. And then we see there is immense practicality in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Sri Ramakrishna's life and his teachings in his gospel are immensely practical. Before Sri Ramakrishna, nowhere would we find such hope. Mostly in our religious teachings, we say to people to do certain things in order to follow spiritual disciplines, but do not show how to do those things. Teachings remain as teachings and nothing more. Suppose we go to learn yoga. The yoga teacher would not simply tell us to practice, suppose halasana, a plow posture, give a lecture on a step-by-step theoretical explanation of the same. Rather, what she does, or he does, they would personally demonstrate how to do this particular posture. Such teachers would both say and show how to do it. This sort of immense practicality is found in Sri Ramakrishna's life and teachings. He has shown through a down-to-earth practice that religion is an applied science. Religious instructions are doable by human beings. You don't have to be a person from heaven, an angel, to practice spirituality. You are what you are. And at your place, you can practice these things in your life. That is called practical spirituality. Sri Ramakrishna himself practiced many difficult spiritual disciplines and austerities, despite having a very, very frail body. This is a source of great inspiration that the teachings are indeed practicable. The life of Sri Ramakrishna gives us still more hope, highlighting his down-to-earth nature in many wonderful recorded events. Let us give an example. Sri Ramakrishna says, in the Gospel it is said somewhere, one day, Sri Ramakrishna is saying, one day while meditating, I found that my mind has gone to Rasik's house. While meditating, his mind has gone to somebody else's house. This admission of Sri Ramakrishna seems to be incredibly daring. And that his disciples recorded it was equally so. The disciples did not consider it an insignificant fact, nor did they think that it is a blemish on Sri Ramakrishna's perfected mind. But the great truth is revealed here is that even the mind of the life of Sri Ramakrishna could wander about when he was sitting in meditation. What can be said of our condition then? There is, of course, a caveat in that Sri Ramakrishna was the savior. His mind went to Rasik's house to save him. But our mind, while we are sitting in meditation, may not go to the supermarket for such a saving reason, to save someone. Although we cannot equate our mental wanderings to those of Sri Ramakrishna's, we can still extract hope and assurance from this fact that it is a natural phenomenon, and we have to bring back the wandering mind again and again and continue to meditate. That is the great hope. Though hints to some kinds of spiritual practices featured in the lives of other great teachers, that they practice some spiritual disciplines, this could not be similarly recorded. For example, in the life of Sri Krishna, it is mentioned that he went to Sandipani's house for training and mastered several lessons, but the details of what was undertaken as spiritual austerities are not mentioned. In the life of Jesus, it is said that after his baptism by John, he was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry and the tempter came. Thus goes the story. Here again, the exact details of the period of fasting are missing. Also, in the Ramayana, it is written that Sri Rama was taught by Vasishtha, but nowhere it is mentioned that they had to do difficult austerities. From these sources, we do not gain the same hope of seeing spirituality becoming practical, as it remains in the realm of theory. Another fact of immense historical value in this respect is that Sri Ramakrishna himself narrated to his disciples, both monastic and lay, the details of each of his spiritual undertakings. In case of other such great personages, it may be true that the disciples thought that if they narrate the details of the human aspect of their teachers, then they might undermine their teachers being great or divine. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, therefore, spirituality has become very much practical. For this reason, the Gospel makes it easy for us to take up the challenges of our spiritual life, because we know that these challenges are but natural to all. Our resolve is strengthened knowing that we are not the only ones struggling and suffering. Everyone does that. Shared joy is double joy. Shared sorrow or suffering is half sorrow. Many times we hear people say, Swamiji, you don't know my story, how I have suffered. I think none has experienced such bad and sad story in their life. Well, all such people believe that their difficulty and sufferings are unique. Of course, this belief is sustained only for want of knowledge or consideration of how others have suffered and still suffering. It is for this reason that Sri Ramakrishna undertook such severe austerities to realize God and showed it to us. He himself has said that this was needed for the sake of teaching others. Loko Siksha, he said. Sri Krishna also made a similar pronouncement in the Gita, saying that, O Partha, in all the three worlds, there is no duty whatsoever for me to fulfill. Name parthasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana. There is nothing unachieved that has to be achieved for me. Still, I am engaged in work, Sri Krishna says. Then he explains why, saying, for, I quote, for if at any time I do not continue vigilantly in action, people will follow my example in every way. As a result, he continues saying that he will be the cause of ruining his own creation. Thus, Sri Krishna says that he must undertake those actions, both pleasure and suffering. Actions means both, to teach others and set an example for others. These realistic and practical examples, however, do not undermine Sri Ramakrishna being a divine incarnation of God. Never. In a similar spirit of doing action to help others, the Holy Mother laments that she has but 2 hands and not 4. She says, if I had but 4 hands, I could have done much more to serve my children. By wanting to serve, by doing and not merely saying, the Holy Mother was an ideal to be followed. She has herself said, I have done more than enough to set up an achievable ideal. A true yoga teacher is not one who merely writes big books on yoga, but one who practices it and can show others how to do it. This is the hallmark of true greatness and spirituality. And one more point, I have some time to discuss. In the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna speaks of the necessities of all varieties of people and people at different levels of their life's journey. It contains guidance to all types of people, not excluding even the agnostics and the so-called non-believers or atheists. Everybody has a place in the Gospel. They too are truth seekers. Some people are misled, but they too are truth seekers. Sri Ramakrishna gives an example. He says, say a mother has 5 children and she has a fish to cook. She makes different dishes out of it and gives each one of her children what suits him or her. Similarly, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we will see answers to everyday life questions. Some seekers may be inclined towards meditation. There are some who will be inclined towards bhakti and some towards jnanam. There is a place for everyone, irrespective of their spiritual affiliation also. The Gospel is therefore a universal scripture which does not address the need of only one type of people or a sect. At the same time, we have to keep it in mind that all the things that Sri Ramakrishna has said, for example, about yoga or other paths, are not intended for one and the same person. When we read it, we will find the things we need for our own progresses or purposes. All the teachings in a scripture may be considered gems, but all may not be intended to be undertaken by the same person. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is the most modern of the scriptures. It is also the most progressive, very accurate, progressive in its approach, which does not make the readers uneasy to accept its teachings, because it happily combines the past spiritual ways with their applicability in the present day context. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna is the latest of the incarnations of God, whose life and teachings are uniquely suitable for addressing modern maladies. There is an ever-growing number of open-minded people all over the world who are seeking for free and fresh air of spirituality to breathe in. Sri Ramakrishna's life and teachings are sure to make difference in their life and guide them to the fulfillment of their ultimate purpose in living. Such as Sri Ramakrishna is talking to us through his gospel. He is an incarnation of God. He is actually not talking to our mind or to our emotions, not to our intellect and its reasonings, but he is talking directly to our soul, which is desperately in need of liberation or freedom from bondage, or to the God in us he is speaking to. That is why each and every teaching in the gospel, each and every word uttered by Sri Ramakrishna in the gospel are so powerful. That is the benefit of reading the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you very much. We have 6-7 minutes time. If you have any question, do you have a program of question and answer or not?
Yes, Maharaj. We have got a program of question answer for 10 minutes.
Okay, well, almost 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Fine.
If any participants want to ask, either they can type in the chat message or they can unmute themselves and ask the questions.
Thank you for addressing us today, and it was really very reflective and thought-provoking to listen to you regarding how you started from the very second meeting of Sri Mo, and the different perspective that you put or presented was really new to us, and particularly to me, I can say, definitely. I do not really have a question related to today's talk as such, but because we are given the chance to ask question, so in relation to the gospel, may I ask something from the gospel for a clarification?
Yeah, of course, of course.
So this question is about the relationship of Guru and Shishya, and how Guru's grace, by Guru's grace only Shishya can attain what he can attain. And the example Thakur has given is that the big tree that after it's cut by the axe and it's nearly cut, then the person stands back and the tree falls on its own. So this was given in relation to how Guru plays the role in a devotee's life. So it seems to me, very foolishly, perhaps, like it was everything that Guru is doing. Then what is that in that example? What is the role of the devotee? Like Guru has the power to cut the tree, and after that, by his grace only tree falls. So, and if I take the trunk of the tree as the devotee whose life is getting transformed, so what is, like, devotee really doesn't have any power.
Well,
confusing question.
Well, fine. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful question. But if you look at the question from the calculative standpoint, I should say, because if we try to quantize things, then the problem is like that. So if you take it literally, then there is a problem. But thing is that Thakur is saying, not only Thakur, it has been said in the Guru Gita also, and by all the Guru teachers, that there is a big role for the Guru to play. Now you see, when you are doing some research, suppose you have taken up a PhD thesis, you are doing a research Now your project is being guided by your guru. And when you find it difficult to continue further or have some problem, then you go to the guru, and the guru clarifies and also gives some advice how to go about it. So all through your journey, the guru is there. You are assured of a guru because the guide is there. So, and then when you finish it, so the whole project is there, your name will come first in the paper, but still your guru name will be there at the end because he was the guide. So it is exactly like that. You have done everything, but the guru is there to guide you. That is why you have to accept his participation in this process. It is not that the guru is cutting and you are not doing anything. The thing is that there is a story, a small boy was trying to turn a big stone. So he was pushing it, but the stone did not move. And he started sweating and started gasping for breath. He stood up. Then his father, who was standing at a distance, he asked him, "Are you sure that you have applied all available power or resources to achieve the purpose or do the work?" Then the child said, "How do you suspect me of my sincerity and seriousness? I am perspiring, I am out of breath." The father said, "That I can see, my dear, but you have not asked for my help, which was available." So one should not be very arrogant. And another thing is that, as I said, I gave the example of the guide. So the gurus are those who have practiced and achieved some success in the spiritual field. They may not be realized souls, like when you want to learn physics, you don't need an Einstein to come and teach you. Any teacher who has the physics degree can teach you. So it is like that. You don't need to expect a teacher like that, but a teacher who knows about this path, who has himself practiced. So a practicing guru, that is an idea. And in Sanskrit, the word guru is actually translated as acharya, not shikshaka. Shikshaka means a theoretical teacher, but acharya means a teacher who himself practices the truth that he or she is going to teach. So acharya means the person who himself practices. This in Sanskrit there is a verse saying that achinoti cha shastrartham acharya sthapayati api swayam acharati yasmat acharya tena kirtita. The acharya or the teacher or the guru is that person who collects the information from the scriptures and puts those things into practice, into his own spiritual practice to achieve liberation. And then that person has surely achieved some milestones, and therefore that person can guide. So it is not that the guru has to do everything. That is why Sri Krishna says in the Gita that adhishthanam tatha karta karanancha prithak vidham vividhascha prithak cheshta daivancha eva atra panchamam. So the person who is trying to realize means the student has to practice, student's mind has to be there, student's intellect has to cooperate, and all the surroundings will be there. But the fifth condition, the last condition is God, God's help or Guru's help or God's grace, all these things. These are the last, that is the last condition. So Daivancha eva atra panchamam. So the help of the Guru or help of God, that means God's grace. This is the fifth condition, but all other conditions are about you, about the student. So that example is given, it is not to be taken literally. The idea is that you have to cut it and the result comes by the grace of God. You see, that is why Sri Krishna says in the Gita, our main problem or mistake is that we think when we are doing some work, the result means a success. It is not like that. You can go on doing something which is not logical, which is not also the valid path. That path or that process will not lead you to a successful result because you are following the wrong process. Therefore, result does not mean always a success. Result means an outcome. It may be a success, it may be a failure. So grace is that you leave it on God and don't think too much about that, but do your job, do your work, and leave the result on God. And that is the idea of grace here. So one can speak a lot about it, but it is like that one has to do oneself, but Guru's grace or Guru's help, Guru's guidance is always there, should be there.
Just to follow on to what you just said, can I ask that how do we know that we have tried enough? Because sometimes we think like, okay, as you said, that it can lead to success or failure. And it might come to our mind, oh, if I had taken the other route, I could be success, because ultimately when we are trying to achieve something, thinking that we are going to be successful, that we try.
You see, these scriptures, particularly the Upanishadic literature or Vedic literature, they are a collection of stories of successes of all successful people in this field. So if the same thing has been corroborated by thousands and thousands of people through millenniums, then it is a sure success. It is a process that will lead you to sure success. They are not talking about any speculation. That is why in our language, it is not called philosophy, it is called darshana. Darshana means realization. There is no speculation. Philosophy can be speculative, but darshana is never speculative. It is based on experiences. The scriptures are the records of experiences of all successful people through ages together. So it is not that they are guiding you under some speculation, depending on some speculation. They are guiding you depending on the truth that has been already verified. That is the beauty of following the person, the Guru, who is deriving the knowledge from the scriptures. Not gurus growing up like mushrooms everywhere, not like that. So Shankaracharya says, any knowledge which comes not from any traditional source is not a knowledge. Because that can be a speculation that may lead you to unsuccessful result. Yes. So thank you very much, Deepa. This is a wonderful question you have asked. Sri Ramakrishna talks directly to soul and not to mind or intellect. You see, Sri Ramakrishna himself has said that this is not my idea. Sri Ramakrishna said that he could see the inside of everyone like one sees a thing inside a glass case. So he is not talking to a person who is a professor or a teacher or a judge or anything. He is talking to a soul which is in bondage, and the bondage may be different types of bondages. Your body is a bondage, your mind is a bondage, my mind is a bondage. So different types of bondages. So Sri Ramakrishna is not considering who is coming to him. Now, there is no discrimination about that. Whether it is a man or a woman, whether it is a young child or a grown-up person, old man, or whether it is an Indian or a non-Indian, whether it's German or nothing, no such things are considered. Everyone is a soul in bondage. Therefore, Sri Ramakrishna is talking to that soul. So how that jiva which is inside, which is pining for liberation or aspiring for liberation, that is the idea. Spiritual teachers, particularly teachers like Sri Ramakrishna and others, they directly speak to our soul. Thank you. I think we have, passed our time. So,
Pranam Maharaj,
namaskar.
it was a wonderful talk. We are blessed to get a picture, a bird eye view on Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel. As we all know, there's a Panchama Veda, there's a modern Veda for us. And you took the M's second visit, and you narrated with the 4 points. One is the great baffling questions in philosophy, whether God is with form or without form. Sri Ramakrishna gives with a simple example, ocean and the ice, and he gives that God is with form and without form and is above all. And religious pluralism. Many people say that Sri Ramakrishna spoke religious pluralism or Vedas spoke religious pluralism. It is not, it is religious relativity. And you explained beautifully by explaining what is the difference between tolerance and acceptance. And we don't tolerate, we accept other religions as true or different faiths as the path to God. And Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are divine, and yet they are humanistic. He never neglected, or his teachings never neglected the human being and his sufferings and so on and so forth. And all human beings can reach the ultimate path by following different spiritual paths or different religions. So everyone, according to his taste, he can practice any religion or any path by that, but the goal is always reaching the God or God's consciousness. And also, incidentally, you mentioned that how Master Mahashaya was a hidden, and he was a wonderful instrument in thy hands or in God's hands. And also, you nicely made us to understand that religion is not mere dogmas, or it is not theory, rather it is an applied science. And Sri Ramakrishna made us to understand this. And when we study Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we will come to understand that we can talk with God, and we can see God, we can hear from God, etc., etc. And also you made a wonderful mark or observation that details of spiritual practice or spiritual struggles of different incarnations, we don't come across either in the Ramayana or in the Mahabharata or in the Bhagavata or in any other scriptures of the world. Whereas in the history of its mankind, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we get first that how the spiritual practice struggles was practiced or observed by the incarnation, and it was listened, or it is listened by his own mouth. And also in the gospel, it is not that only for the followers of the path of knowledge, that Jnana Yogi, or the path of selfless action, Karma Yogi, or the path of devotion, that is Bhakti Yogi, or the path of psychic control, that is Raja Yogi. Not only for Bhaktas, even for the agnoists and atheists, even they can also follow Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. For them also, Sri Ramakrishna has given a place in his gospel or in his teachings. And you explained the beautifully in like mother's example. Mother cooks different dishes according to the taste and the digestion capacity of the children. So like that, Sri Ramakrishna has given a wonderful teaching. Thank you, Maharaj. And we are greatly blessed and privileged to hear your wonderful talk on this blessed day on Sri Ramakrishna's birthday celebration. In the forthcoming days, again, we will be eagerly waiting for you to hear more and more. Thank you, Maharaj.
Namaskar. So we take leave of you. So have a nice time.